This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, welcome everybody to another edition of Squash Canada's Coach PD webinar series. Today's topic we think you'll find very exciting. It's on emotional intelligence and its implications to sports coaching. Our presenter today is Esme Gillick, who is an expert on this topic, having written and presented on this topic a number of times. I was fortunate enough to sit through a presentation on this topic a number of months ago that Esme did and found it very informative and thought that you would find this beneficial. So the topic is in relation to exploring and discussing key topics in relation to emotional intelligence. Esme will kind of get into all the nitty gritty pieces, so I'll let her talk about it. But just a little background on Esme. She grew up in the UK and has a swimming background. She's competed and swam for Fresno State. And correct me if I'm wrong, Esme, you work at Fresno State still as well.
Previously.
Previously, yeah.
Yeah,
So
just left.
she's got an extensive background coaching as an athlete, as an educator, and we think it, like I said, you'll find this topic very beneficial. So I'm going to turn it over to Esme to talk about emotional intelligence and its implications on sports coaching.
Thank you, Jeff. Hi, everyone. I hope everybody is doing well in these still unprecedented times. I hope everybody's hanging in there. If you didn't catch it, my name is Esme Gullick, and I am originally born and raised in the UK. I moved to California when I was 18 for a swim scholarship, and I was fortunate enough to get my bachelor's degree in physical education, and then I went on to get my master's degree in sports psychology. And alongside that, I swam for Fresno State. And I was also fortunate enough, once I graduated with my bachelor's and finished my 4 years of swimming, I was fortunate enough to coach the team that I had swam for in those 2 years of my graduate degree. So what I'm going to talk about today all came from that graduate degree, sports psychology. It's all about emotional intelligence. And I'll go into a little bit about what my project was and where it came from. I'm now a coach and APE teacher. I coach at the club level and I teach elementary, so K through 6. And I really like to apply everything that I have in this project towards my professions now. So I feel like it would be beneficial for anyone who is teaching or coaching in those realms as well. So we're going to start off by talking about the project I created itself. So I think I was in my first year of my graduate degree, second semester, and we had to create a project, a written project about something we were interested in. And as an athlete or a previous athlete just coming out of retirement here, I really found that I was interested in emotional intelligence. I knew that emotions played a huge part in what we do as an athlete. And as I had just become a coach at the time, I was kind of intrigued into how emotions played with coaching and how emotional intelligence could improve our coaching performance. And now I looked at the research, I looked at some literature, and there was a ton of stuff about emotional intelligence in athletes, but there really wasn't much about coaching with emotional intelligence. So I was speaking to my mentor, Wade Gilbert, and he said, well, this is a great gap for us to fill. And I feel like your culminating project for your master's degree should be something in this realm. So we kind of took that on and we kind of ran with that. And we created this guidebook. So the guidebook is a topic by topic coaching with emotional intelligence step-by-step guide. So it talks about hot topics in a wide variety of sports, things like athlete success, athlete setbacks, injuries, team dynamics, coaching staff dynamics. And we talk about those topics and how we can apply emotional intelligence towards them in those certain situations. So, of course, before I started the project, we kind of had to do some research about it. Was it really important? Where did the data back this up? And we created this model that you can see on the left side of the screen here. What we really wanted to know was, why did we need to increase our emotional intelligence? And what we found through the literature was that increasing your emotional intelligence actually betters your relationship with your athlete. So a strong coach-athlete relationship is in part due to coaching with emotional intelligence. And now it's great to have a good coach-athlete relationship, but why is it important towards our success and our athlete success? And we looked into a little bit more of the research on those topics, and we found out that a strong coach-athlete relationship actually enhanced athlete performance, enhanced athlete well-being, and also enhanced coach well-being. So I kind of made this diagram that kind of shows how an increase of coaching with emotional intelligence indirectly affects athlete performance, athlete well-being, and coach well-being, which, you know, is all we really want in sports. We want our athletes to do well, we want them to be happy, and we want to be happy ourselves as well, and that equals success in itself. So we create the guidebook based on that research, and it's kind of taken off since then. I've been able to do some webinars across the world. This is actually a very convenient one for me because I'm actually in the same time zone as you guys. Usually I do one in New Zealand, and I got to be up till like midnight to do it. So with that, we'll roll on, and we're going to talk about what we're going to learn today in our webinar. So we're going to start off by just defining what emotional intelligence is and understanding why it's important towards our coaching practice. Then we're going to go into two of the main topics that I talk about in the guidebook, and Jeff and I kind of narrowed them down, talked about what ones we really wanted that kind of apply to squash itself as well as sports as a whole. And the first one of those is emotions in the heat of competition. So we're going to learn the impact of our emotions in competition, and we're going to develop some strategies to best regulate in those moments. And then the second topic we're going to talk about is athlete setbacks. So we're going to learn how to incorporate emotional intelligence into times where our athletes aren't doing so great. So I want to start off by defining emotional intelligence, and really there's not one definition. You could probably look at a dictionary definition and they would give you something more concrete, but I've looked at the literature of emotional intelligence, and everybody has the same concept but written differently. And I like this one. This is from the Institute of Health and Human Potential, and they say that emotional intelligence is recognizing, understanding, and managing our own emotions, and recognizing, understanding, and influencing the emotions of others as well. So we've got two components to this definition. The first one is the top row. We're talking about our own emotions. And a skill we have within ourselves, that's known as an intrapersonal skill. So that part of the definition is intrapersonal. The below line, the second line, talks about the emotions of other people. And when you have a skill with other people, this is known as interpersonal skills. So really, emotional intelligence is about having intrapersonal knowledge and skills, as well as interpersonal knowledge and skills related around emotions. Now, you're probably thinking, why is this important to me? Why is this important to coaching? Or is it really important to coaching? You know, it's nice to have a good relationship with our athletes, and it's nice to be able to regulate our emotions, but is it really important? And we looked into some literature on quality coaching and effective coaching. And this one by Cote and Gilbert, funnily enough, Wade Gilbert is my mentor, and he led me through this project. But Cote and Gilbert in 2009 did an extensive review of a bunch of literature to do with positive psychology, coaching, teaching, athlete development. And they found that quality coaching really comes down to three concepts. The first is professional knowledge, which is how well you know your sport and how well you can teach it. So we're thinking about things like rules, thinking about things like skills, tactics, strategies, stuff like that. How well do you know your sport? The second one that Cote and Gilbert found is interpersonal knowledge. So how well can we relate to and lead other people? And then the last one is intrapersonal knowledge, how we know ourselves and how we can sustain our own improvement efforts. Now, if I'm looking at this graphic on the screen right here, these 3 points, the interpersonal knowledge and intrapersonal knowledge sure look a lot like the examples of what emotional intelligence have when it comes to intrapersonal and interpersonal skills. So if we take those two and we put them right next to each other, I kind of see a lot of similarities. And it indirectly says that, you know, interpersonal knowledge and intrapersonal knowledge in coaching is really incorporating emotional intelligence. So that's why Cote and Gilbert think that it's so important. So we'll move on now, and we'll talk a little bit more about emotional intelligence. And I'll talk about the history to start off with. Emotional intelligence was originally developed by two men called John Mayer and Peter Salovey. And this was in the 1970s, late 1970s, early 1980s. And they kind of created a way to value emotional intelligence on a scale, how to measure it, and how to develop it. And it wasn't until the 1990s, I think 1991, that John Mayer and Peter Salovey were actually able to coin the term emotional intelligence. And it wasn't until the 1990s that emotional intelligence really took off. You know, the 70s and 80s was kind of just this hidden under the rug concept that not many people spoke about. And then in the 1990s, after the term was coined, it kind of took off. But it really became popularized by a man named Dan Goleman. And you guys may have heard of Dan Goleman before. Dan Goleman wrote a book called What is Emotional Intelligence? And the main concept behind this book was reasons why emotional intelligence is more important than IQ in day-to-day life. And later on in his career, Dan Goleman created this model, which is called the model of crucial competence. And this isn't the only model of emotional intelligence, but I think it's definitely the more comprehensive and easy to understand model. So I definitely like to use this when I talk about emotional intelligence, and it is the main concept behind the book. So this is everything that the topics about emotional intelligence in my guidebook are led towards, okay? So we're gonna talk about each of these competencies and what they really mean. So we'll start off with self-awareness. Self-awareness is Daniel Goleman's first competency that he believes is important in emotional intelligence. And this is our ability to recognize our own emotions and how they affect our own thoughts and behaviors. Self-management is our ability to control any impulsive feelings or thoughts that we have, and how to manage our behavior in a healthy way. So if we think about that red and that yellow bubble right there, that's our intrapersonal knowledge, things we know about ourselves and ways we can manage ourselves. The green and blue bubbles move on to more of that interpersonal knowledge, interpersonal skills, how we react with other people. So social awareness is the ability to observe, understand, and manage the emotions of others or concerns of others. And relationship management is the ability to take the emotions of others to manage social interactions as best as possible. So those are the four main competencies. And if you don't know too much about emotional intelligence, you kind of look at that and think, well, how does this help me? You know, what does self-awareness really mean? How do I show self-awareness? And this is where the sub-competencies in Goleman's model really come into effect. So the big bubbles at the top, these are our main competencies. The sub-competencies underneath, these are the more specific skills that we can show that kind of contribute to self-awareness or self-management or social awareness or relationship management. So for example, if we take the self-management bubble, the yellow bubbles here, some skills that contribute towards self-management are emotional self-control, adaptability, achievement orientation, and positive outlook. So those sub-competencies kind of contribute towards the main competency. And that's kind of what we base the guidebook on. So I just wanted to overview kind of where I fit into on your coaching pathway and where I kind of fit into in coaching pathways in general. Now, what you're looking at on the screen here, this is the Athletics Canada coaching pathway. I took a look at the Squash Canada coaching pathway, and it's a little less, I guess, put together, I would say. You guys have a lot of different things going on in a lot of different spaces. So I thought I'd leave this one up here and show you this comprehensive version of the Athletics Canada pathway so we can kind of understand. So a lot of the times when you look at a coaching pathway, you see a lot of professional knowledge or sport-related knowledge topics. So for example here, this is to be a club coach in Athletics Canada. And you can see a lot of sport-specific things like endurance, sprints and hurdles, wheelchair racing. We're talking about safety and emergency action plans, planning a practice, strength training, and then obviously you've got your ethical decisions down there, which is a safe sport module. And really you don't see much about emotional intelligence here. You talk about the role of the coach, which is a pretty broad concept. and you talk about maybe teaching and learning, maybe some emotional intelligence would come into that. But really, a lot of coaching pathways lack the emotional intelligence components in their coaching pathway graphic. So this is another one for a performance coach. So the next step up after club coach for Athletics Canada, we're talking about biometrics, physiology, nutrition planning, strength and recovery. It isn't until you really get to that bottom box there, that bottom green box, where you talk about managing conflict. That might be an emotional intelligence skill. Psychology of performance, you might get some emotional intelligence in there as well, but really probably not enhancing the full education of emotional intelligence. So that is why I'm here. That is why I am eager to share what I have with you all. This is actually the NCCP coaching competencies, which your national governing body kind of runs by. And the 5 competencies they have in their module here is problem solving, valuing, critical thinking, leading, and interacting. And I think with emotional intelligence, we are definitely trying to contribute to some of those. Being a leader is an emotionally intelligent skill. Interacting with others is an emotionally intelligent skill. And valuing others as well is definitely an emotional intelligence skill. So now that we know that this is important, let's get on with the real content, the real knowledge that we're going to learn today. So we're going to start off by talking about emotions in the heat of competition. So think about maybe a time where you've been in a competition, or your athlete has been in a competition, and things are getting pretty hot and heavy, and things are getting intense, and you're kind of losing your cool, or you're getting too excited. So these are the moments that we're trying to target, and how we can best use our emotions and our behaviors to benefit us and our athletes. So I'm going to start off by talking about the basics of emotions. You know, it's one thing to talk about emotions, but do we really know where they come from? So we'll talk about how they manifest and where they come from. We're going to start off, we have a subjective experience. So this is a defining moment or situation during a competition. So maybe a set point, game point, something good that happens or something bad that happens, something that is really about to spark a reaction. From the subjective experience, we will gain an emotion. So the emotion derives as a result from this subjective experience. Now, our emotions come from thought. So however you think, or however your thought repertoire comes from the subjective experience, is going to trigger a certain emotion. For example, if you think that winning the game point is a good thing, you're going to, your thoughts lead to excitement, or your thoughts lead to ecstasy, something like that. If you think that winning the game point is a terrible thing, your thoughts about that are going to lead to sadness or fear or disparity, something like that. So we've got that emotion, and then the next step is the physiological or psychological response. So this is our body's response to whatever thoughts and emotions that we are now feeling. Now, it really depends on what we are feeling at the time. If we are feeling excited, then the psychological and physiological response is mainly going to be around arousal. And often when you are aroused, especially in a positive light, you often feel an increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, maybe increased blood pressure, pupils dilate, and sometimes you can get sweaty hands, sometimes you can get a little bit shaky. Now, this is good up to a certain extent. So we want to remember that all emotions are good up to a certain extent. Now, it's good to have a little bit of an increased heart rate. That means we're warmed up, we're ready to go for the next game. It's good to know that we have dilated pupils. That gives us a wider range to view from in our next game. But if we are going to a next game and our emotions are too high, we may get that shaky feeling. Our heart rate might be too high, that we're kind of overdoing it a little bit too much. So we want to remember that this next topic that we're going to talk about here, we've got to control our emotions to the point where they're benefiting us, but they're not being overdone to the point where they're hindering us. And then finally, from our psychological and physiological response, we will get a behavioral response. So maybe your body temperature is increased, and your heart is pounding really fast, and your breathing rate has gone up. our behavioral response is the outward expression of whatever is happening inside. So you can see I have here on the graphics on the bottom, this guy say he's won a game point, his emotion is excitement, his heart rate has gone up, his pupils have dilated, and now his behavioral response is maybe jumping for joy or fist pumping or getting super excited. Now, that's all well and dandy, but if it was in a negative light, we might see something that we don't really want to see in a game like it situation. So I have a graphic on the screen. This is one of my favorite things to talk about in the webinar. There is research behind these 5 emotions, and they call them the core 5 emotions. So those are sadness, joy, fear, disgust, and anger. And if you haven't watched the movie Inside Out, I would recommend doing so because it kind of brings light to how emotions manifest in behavior across all 5 of these emotions. So when we're thinking about emotions and what emotions we might feel on a day-to-day basis or in competition, we've got to think about all five of these. I think a lot of people go to the joy and the anger because that's a lot of what happens in coaching, but we've also got to think about sadness. We've also got to think about fear, and we've also got to think about disgust and how we manifest those in our game-like situation. All right, so moving on to how we manifest our behaviors. So everyone reacts slightly different to the same trigger. So there's one thing to say, oh, I want to change my emotions and I want to change the way I feel about certain triggers. But in the actual fact, everybody reacts slightly different to the same trigger, and that's okay. And I can show you in this picture right here. This is Andy Murray's family and friends. Andy Murray is a British tennis player, and I believe he's probably playing Wimbledon at this in this picture. And you can see his family and friends reacting to what is most likely him winning an important point in the game. And you can see at the front here, this is his wife in the white coat, and she's super excited. The guy behind her seems kind of angry. I mean, he's probably still excited, right? But his manifesting emotions seem kind of angry. If you go right over to the right of the picture, you see Judy Murray, Andy's mom, kind of fist pumping. She seems pretty calm, cool, collected, kind of controlling her emotions here. And then you see right at the very front, you see this man, he's got his phone out taking a picture of whatever is happening. He's obviously so cool as a cucumber that he's able to get his phone out and take a picture of the moment. So these are all people that are feeling excitement towards Andy Murray's point. However, their manifested behaviors are looking very differently. And the way we react to a trigger is dependent on a couple of things. It's dependent on your personality traits, so often how you were raised, what your genetics are, things like that. And then also your relationship with the trigger. So how much history do you have with this trigger? What's been your involvement in the process of this trigger? And how much time, efforts, money have you invested in it? I always use the example, I used the example a few weeks ago of 2 hockey teams. You know, if you are the coach of one hockey team and you've been the coach for 30 years, you do this full time, you have a great relationships with your athletes, your emotions towards defining moments in the game are most likely going to be very different to the emotions of the coach on the other side of the rink who has only been coaching for 6 months, barely knows his players, only works part-time for the team and isn't too invested. So you really got to think about those relationships with those triggers to think about, okay, how do I react to this emotionally? And I was going to show you guys this video, but Jeff and I were trying to work out the kinks with the sound earlier, and unfortunately it didn't work. This is Coach Kelly Anoye Perez, and she is the UCLA softball coach. And she really summarizes what I just said in a very good story. She talks about her team who were going through a losing season. And she says, you know, everybody reacts differently. And she gives this really good example of her 2 children. And she says, I have 2 children, one's 14, one's 18, one's a boy, one's a girl, but they were raised under the same roof. Now, when my kids were younger and I put my daughter in timeout, she'd go crazy. She'd go wild. She'd be yelling back at her mom. She'd be throwing things across the room. And she said, but when I put my son in timeout when he was younger, he kind of went into himself, crawled up in a little ball, started crying. She said, I raise these people the same. They have the same genetics, and yet they still react to triggers in different ways. So we've really got to think about our innate kind of personality drives as to how we react to certain emotions. And she talks about this in reference to her team. So at the time, her team were going through a little bit of a rough patch, and they kept reacting terribly to embarrassing situations. Some of them would strike out, or someone would get caught out easily. And she said they would be throwing their helmets and crying and stuff like that. And she said, I gave them this example of my children, and she said, everybody reacts differently, and that's okay. We can't really change things that are set genetically or personality-wise in us. However, we can change how we react to the overall situation. And I think that's one thing to really take away with your athletes or with your coaching staff or with your team as a whole. We might all feel differently towards these triggers, but how as a team or as a whole are we going to change our behaviors to adapt to what adversity we have? All right, so before we move on into this, sorry, I'm trying to escape from this. Before we move on into our takeaways for this topic, I would like to have a quick discussion, since I think there's only a few of us on the webinar today. I always find that when I can get into a breakout room or I can hear other coaches discussing, that's when we learn best. So I want us to sit and talk about any moments or defining moments in our coaching career where we've really felt like we could have done a better job at managing our emotions. And afterwards, we'll talk about some strategies for managing emotions and having that kind of emotional resilience. But I'd like us to kind of reflect on our coaching practice right now and have a quick discussion about moments where we could have done better in that situation. I am going to stop sharing my screen. So Jeff wrote a comment, please feel free to unmute and discuss. So, this is a no judge zone. We're going to take our coaching hats off here and be real people for a moment. And if anybody would like to share, I would love to hear it.
Hi, Sebastian here. I've been coaching for about 2 years now, and I don't really have an example of a moment where I felt like I kind of lost my cool or something like that, but I can definitely share moments where I've lost my cool on court in a competition. Is that something we're interested in, or?
Absolutely, go ahead.
So I've started playing squash about 8 years ago, and I've already a very competitive type of guy. I played badminton and tennis and racket sports in general, and I come from a place where there was no squash courts. So moving to a bigger city, squash courts were there, picked up the sport, fell in love with it, and started to really want to play tournaments, and really got involved in the competitive side of things. And that's where I really realized that my biggest opponent was my own self, my own mind. And for some reason, I was never able to perform to my capacity when I was in a tournament. I'd always, people I would beat in the club and regularly, I would lose to at tournaments every single time. And it really got to me, and it got me thinking and realizing that I was giving too much importance to things that were happening on the court. I was not having fun. I was only trying to win at all costs, and it was very deterring to my performance. So I don't know if I've seen to have gotten better at that personally, but I'm not quite clear on exactly how I did it. To me, it's just like being able to let go and trying to be in the present, trying to play one ball at a time instead of thinking about the end result. That seems to be easier for me.
Thank you, Sebastian. So I think one thing I know from being a former athlete and moving towards that coaching realm, when you become a coach, you often gain a lot of self-awareness from your time as an athlete. So you look at your athletes, you see things that they manifest or they do, or personality traits that they have, and it kind of brings you some awareness as to who you were as an athlete. And I think that's something that really benefits you. It's like, oh, if I could go back and play again, this is how I would do it for sure. But that's great to hear. Thank you, Sebastian.
My pleasure.
Anyone else want to contribute?
I have an athlete who's, sorry, I'm at home. I have an athlete who is actually a talented athlete, but he's actually obviously been under a lot of pressure, and I don't even think he enjoys the sport anymore. He doesn't. If he does participate, it's very reluctant, and it's kind of sad because I think there's been an enormous amount of pressure on him. Obviously, it's a very emotional thing, even for him to work out, just, even a non-pressure type, light run kind of thing. So what would a coach do in a position like that?
Good question. So when we're talking about pressure, is this athlete, has this been a chronic issue? Is this something that's been long lasting, or is this something that's come up very suddenly?
I think it's taken a few years. I think he was encouraged to be, the very best, in a world beating kind of scenario, kind of thing. But they speak another language, so I don't exactly understand the whole dynamic of it. But it seemed to have manifested itself, I think, into a lot of pressure, and now it has a big withdrawal component. This has all got to be emotional. You're right; it absolutely is pressure. How do you help in a situation like that? We're just trying to let him do his thing and give him time, but maybe he doesn't want to do the sport anymore. Maybe it's reached that point. I'm not sure, but I expect other coaches have seen this. Just something that we've seen, kind of really come out in the last year or so, after many years of full-on participation.
Thank you. So I'm going to put a pin in that one, actually, because we're going to move on to athlete setbacks. And when you have this chronic lack of performance, or this plateau, or pressure feeling, that can be defined as a setback. He's going through a setback right now. So we're going to talk about setbacks in just a second, and hopefully a few of those strategies and points will be able to help you with that athlete in particular. All right. Okay, I'm going to reshare my screen, and we're going to go back to the slide here. So I want to talk about a few strategies or things that we can do related to emotional intelligence competencies that will help in emotions in the heat of competition. So remember, we're talking about coaches here. As we're coaches, our innate drive is to be able to help our athletes. And often when we attend these webinars, we're like, how can we apply this to my athlete? How can I apply this to my athlete? So I just want you to remember, as we're going through these, it is obviously very transferable to your athletes. A lot of these you can use with your athletes, but think about yourself first. How could I do this in my own coaching practice to benefit my emotional intelligence personally? So when we're talking about self-awareness, becoming aware of our emotions in the heat of competition, the first thing that's really great to do is to ask for feedback. And now this requires kind of swallowing your pride a bit, especially if you are an experienced coach that interacts with a lot of younger coaches, but it's really good to sit down either with your coaching staff as a whole, or with other coaches that you spend a decent amount of time with, and just ask for feedback on, okay, did I react in the right way to this? Should I react better next time? Did I show anything behaviorally that was inappropriate? And often, if you have a good relationship with that person, they're going to give you honest feedback in those cases. Another really good strategy that I've used in the past is a game day journal. And I used this one when I was a graduate assistant coach at the college level, because it's a very serious form of the sport that I'm in. So I'm in swimming, and college level swimming is pretty intense. So I found that, I was kind of getting too emotionally invested in our swim meets, and I was becoming kind of wrapped up. My emotions were becoming wrapped up in meets, and it was taking me a long time to kind of process those emotions and move on. So a really great tool we have is the Game Day Journal, which I have sent to Jeff, and he will send out to you guys as a handout. The Game Day Journal is basically a way to write down what you were feeling, what those emotions felt like physically, and how long you felt them for. So you fill it out right after the competition on say the bus drive home, you fill it out the next morning, how you feel about it, and then you fill it out 1 week later. And if your emotions are still the same as the day of the competition, you probably know, especially if those emotions are negative, you probably know, okay, maybe I need to start working on my emotions in the heat of competition. So a game day journal is a great way to become self-aware of the emotions you're feeling and how long you are feeling those for. And those will help you pick up on common occurrences. Am I feeling angry all the time? Am I feeling excited all the time? What kind of frustration manifestations do I have? How do I show it? So those are some good self-awareness tips. In terms of self-management, how we actually control our emotions in the moment, one thing that I have found pretty productive in my coaching experiences is to buy time where you can. And that's pretty easy in swimming because a lot of the time after an athlete swims a race, they'll go and cool down before they come back to us. So that's already bought time, that's already built into the structure of the sport that I can use to kind of decompress, process my thoughts a little bit before that athlete comes over. Another really good strategy is reset cues or reset buttons. We have one strategy called the emotional reset button. And it's basically just finding a spot on your body that you can press with a little bit of pressure that kind of says, let's reset our emotions, let's reset our body state, and let's come at this with a fresh mind, with a clean slate, as you like to call it. And a really good reset cue is actually on your forehead right here in between your eyebrows, because often when you're angry or when you're overly emotional, you'll actually flex your eyebrows and you'll see that crease right here. So if you touch and you feel that crease, you're like, oh, I'm not very relaxed. And you'll kind of get that hint to say, oh, I need to, calm down. So I know quite a few coaches that use the wrist or just below the hip, and some will use that in between the brow button right there. And it's just the touch that kind of says, okay, I need to reset, I need to move on. And the more you do that in practice, the more you purposely do it and are mindful of it, the more you're likely to do it unconsciously in a game-like situation as well. And then the last one is just to simply take a deep breath. There is a bunch of research that shows deep breathing could have a huge effect on your body stature, your body positioning, your mindset. And there's actually one study that I was reading that says even one breath, just taking one deep breath, has huge psychological and physiological benefits. Moving on to social awareness now. So we're thinking about how we react with others, how we read the minds of others or read the emotions of other people. First thing is to listen to others and observe their emotional state before you react to it. So if you've got an athlete who's just coming out of the court and, he's slumped over, he's looking sad, you have to read that before you go in and you say you did this, and this wrong, or, you didn't do this, or you didn't do this, which I wanted you to do. It's important to read them before you react or you respond to their reactions. And then finally, moving on to relationship management, really important to always assume the best of your athletes. I'm a PE teacher as my full-time job, and I was reading a classroom management book, and it constantly kept telling me in this classroom management book, always assume the best of your students. Always assume that they want to be the best and they want to learn. Because if we don't have that concept or that conception of our students, then we're not going to want the best for them either. We're going to reflect negatively on the fact that we don't think that they want the best for themselves. And then finally, use your leadership. You're a huge role model to your athletes, and making changes and managing conflicts and modeling that to them will really show that we can use this as a positive experience to move on and continue with the success or whatever is the goal. So those are a few examples of things we can do around emotional intelligence during the heat of competition. These are the tangible takeaways we talked about in the past slide. I have sent out the game day journal to Jeff, so anybody that's interested, I think he's probably going to send it out to everyone, but if not, if you're interested, just ask him for that. And then obviously use your emotional reset button, wrist, forehead, hip. I know one coach to do their toe, their big toe. I think it's an acupuncture thing. All right, moving on to athlete setbacks. So this is our next topic in the guidebook. So we're talking about now helping athletes through tough times. And we can think of anything from injuries to just chronic plateauing, not getting a best time or a best score, or not having your best performance for a long time. Anything you can really think of where performance is not going well. So firstly, we want to acknowledge emotions that are felt during setbacks. And this was a comprehensive study of a bunch of different literature that showed different emotions felt during setbacks. And this was the list that was kind of generated. And these are emotions that are not only felt by the athlete during setbacks, but they've also been known to be shown by the coach or felt by the coach during setbacks as well. Because we're so invested in our athletes, we're so into what they're doing because this is our job, that often their emotions also manifest in us as well. So these emotions are anger or frustration. So say, for example, you've got an injury and you can't play. I'm going to be angry about it. I'm frustrated about it. Annoyance. So say maybe you haven't won a game in, 3 months. I'm super annoyed that this isn't working out for me. Fear or anxiety. I know this one happens a lot around team atmospheres. So if you are part of a team and you're expected to contribute to that team, that often creates a fear of anxiety of performing and feeling like you do contribute to the team. Sadness and guilt kind of go hand in hand. So often if you've had chronic lack of success, or you're kind of on this stage of plateauing, you often become sad as you feel like it's not going to come back to what you want it to be. Another one is embarrassment and shame, which often comes in that team-like atmosphere as well. Everybody else is providing to this team except for me. This is embarrassing. I feel like I shouldn't be here anymore. Apathy is just that loss of emotion. I don't feel anything towards this sport anymore because it's not giving me any success. Despair if things are going really bad, and then going back to that team atmosphere again with jealousy and envy. Everybody's doing good. I want to do good, and it can sometimes create that toxic team environment where it doesn't become about working together anymore. It becomes about working against each other to be better than each other. So we got to think about these emotions, because as we're talking about emotional intelligence, it's important to know what emotions are felt. So when it comes to athlete setbacks, the main emotional intelligence competency that we want to enhance is emotional resilience. And emotional resilience is defined as the manner and efficiency in which we adapt to adversity or combat significant sources of stress. So thinking about adversity and how we combat that. And I have a really good example that I include in the guidebook. I'm not sure if anybody knows this lady here, but her name is Monica Seles. Monica Seles is a Yugoslavian tennis player, or she was a Yugoslavian tennis player back in the 90s. And I think 1991 to 1993, she was kind of at the peak of her career, won about 25 major tournaments. And at the time, her country was kind of going through political unrest. And even though she was in the US training for tennis, she was receiving a lot of hate mail from those who felt like she was rejecting their country. And she actually received a few death threats. And obviously this is a setback for anyone, right? If someone's going to send you a death threat, I'm feeling like I'm going through a setback here. Why do people not like me? How do I get better at what I'm doing and make sure I adapt to all people? And then in 1993, I believe it was, during a major tournament, a German man actually came out of the crowd and stabbed Monica Seles in the back with a knife because he didn't want her to win. I think it was another political conflict issue. And it put Monica Seles out of the sport for a couple of years. Not only has she received physiological harm, but she's received a lot of psychological harm. I can't imagine the psychological impact of being stabbed during your while doing your own sport must have. So Monica Seles, she went through a whole resilience program and discussed, with her coaches and stuff, how do we come back from this? How do we become resilient for this? And she actually spent about 3 years out of the sport, but she actually came back to win the Australian Open and win a few more tennis tournaments, major tennis tournaments, from 1996 onwards. And she actually has written a book about it now, Getting a Grip on My Mind, Body, and Self. And it's all about emotional resilience. This is what she accredits her comeback to. So I would really recommend going over to Amazon and getting that book, because it really talks a lot about emotional resilience. What I think is most important when we talk about emotional resilience is positivity. So we're trying to work with our athletes to help them come back from adversity. And the best way to do that is model a positive environment. So this shouldn't just be when they come out of a game or in between two games. This should be at practice, around the rest of the team, in the whole competition environment, from warm up to cool down. We want to create that positive atmosphere to show that, okay, if something comes up, if adversity does come up, we are going to target it, we are going to come back from it, and we are going to come out on the other side better. So a few things that we can do to combat athlete success or deal with athlete success in relation to emotional intelligence. So the first one, when it comes to self-awareness, is mindfulness. Now, this is a huge monopoly that's going on right now. Mindfulness, I feel like everybody is doing. And you can simply just go onto the internet and type in mindfulness, and you could find out anything that you could ever want to find out about it. Mindfulness is basically just the practice of shutting everything else out and focusing on what you are feeling in the situation right now. And you can do it in a form of meditation, in a form of mindfulness thinking. And it's a really great way to just, stop thinking about everything else and say, okay, let's think about how we feel about this specific situation right now. Another great way to practice self-awareness in athlete setbacks is to give yourself time to process the emotions. So a lot of people say, I'm not feeling good about this, and that's not okay. Let's change it right now. And in actual fact, you may need to go home. You may need to sleep on it. You may need to talk to your husband, wife, brother, sister, parents about it, and just give yourself time to process those so that you can understand them in the best way. It's not always the best way to just, attack it right there and then. Self-management techniques during athlete setbacks. First technique that I really like to use is positive reappraisal, and I've sent Jeff a positive reappraisal worksheet that he can send out to all of you. Positive reappraisal is taking a situation and rewording it in a positive light. So, for example, if I say, I'm the weakest at running on my team. When we're doing conditioning, I'm the worst. If you change that and use positive reappraisal to create that in a positive light, you could say, I can only get better at running. I have much more potential at running, or I would like to be the best on the team, and I'm going to work to be the best on the team. That's a much better way to look at it than saying, oh, I'm the worst. I'm the worst on the team. Often don't change if you see it in a negative light. Problem-focused coping is another good strategy for self-management in athlete setbacks. Problem-focused coping is basically looking at the situation, looking at your emotions, and instead of dwelling in those emotions, thinking about strategies or skills or things that we can do to overcome them, rather than just sitting there and thinking about, the setback that we're having. And then the last one of my favorite acronyms, the ARSE acronym, which I'll talk about in just a second, which is a really good way to develop resilience, not just within yourself, but within your athletes as well. And I'll go straight to the acronym right now. One thing that I've talked in other webinars about is about having potential ARSE meetings with your coaching staff or with your athletes. And ARSE stands for acknowledge, review, strategize, and execute. So say your athlete is going through a major setback and you're both not feeling good about it, and nothing's going right, things don't seem to be improving. You can call your athlete in for a meeting and have this ARSE meeting. So firstly, you acknowledge and both accept responsibility for the setback. So not only should the athletes accept responsibility, you should talk about what you have done to contribute to this, and how that has manifested. Then you review why the setback is happening. So you think about potential reasons why that athlete is going through a setback or why things aren't going great right now. The next step is to strategize. So together you would make a strategy, make a plan to take corrective action, and then finally you execute. So the athlete goes and continues to perform. And if that doesn't go right again, you call them back in. We have another ARSE meeting where we probably strategize a little bit different this time. So ARSE meetings are a great way to use self-management in athlete setbacks. Next one, social awareness. Like I said, meet with your athlete regularly to recognize and understand how they are feeling. So when you go back to that ARSE meeting, you know, the acknowledgement part of it, where we're acknowledging the setback, not only should we acknowledge the setback itself, but how it's making us feel. And you can talk about how it makes you feel as a coach, but most importantly, listen to how it makes them feel as an athlete. Another thing to do is gain organizational awareness by observing who is influencing their teammates during setbacks. So organizational awareness is basically the knowledge or the awareness of how your team molds together, who is the influential members of the team, who are kind of the sheep, the followers, who are really influenced by certain other people, who are the leaders, stuff like that. So if you are managing on a team basis, I know squash is probably a lot of individual work, but if you do have a team and your team does work together quite a lot, it's really good to kind of take note of who is doing the influencing, who is doing the following, and it can kind of give you a sense to, you know, if there's a negative emotion that's going on, or if your leader is going through a setback, are the rest of your team also going through an emotional setback as well, because that leader is. And then finally, talking about relationship management, again, just use your influential tendencies, use your leadership by modeling it yourself. You know, if something's not going right, make sure you're putting it in a positive light, make sure you're not changing your body language or, you know, using words that you shouldn't use during athlete setbacks, because that is going to translate straight into your athletes. And then a final one, this is one of my favorites. I actually found this one in a previous webinar. We had a little Q&A at the end, and one of the guys said, oh, this is what I use when we're trying to be resilient. And it was a cricket coach, and he said, when things aren't going well for us and they come back into the dugout or whatever it's called in cricket, you know, they come up and they say, that wasn't very good. And the coaches say, next job. You know, next thing, we're focusing on the next job now. This isn't time to dwell on what we had. We're moving to the next job. And they said the coaches started using it, and before they knew it, at practice and in competitions, the players were using it on each other as well. And it just became a thing as soon as they came into that, to the bench on the side, next job, we're going out for the next thing. And there's a bunch of ones that you could think of. Move on is a really good one. We Move is another good one that I know is like a popular thing in Twitter world right now. We Move, and that's what I want to open the floor up to on this final discussion right here. Is, does anyone have, or does anyone know any other coaches or teams that use any grit or resilience phrases like the ones that we've just mentioned? Because it's great to share. Everybody can benefit from these. Stop sharing the screen. Does anyone like to share any of the grit, resilience phrases, slogans? Would anyone like to share anything that they say to their athletes during a setback that really is influential or really works well?
Jeff Williams here.
Go ahead.
I don't know if this is more resilience or in moments of match play, I work with my athletes on shelving issues. So if they get to a call that they don't like, or a scenario that is not going well, how to still be able to maintain performance in those moments. And I talk about with them shelving it, putting that object, put that feeling or that emotion into a box essentially to put it on the shelf. We will we will analyze it, we will work on it, but for the moment of performance, being able to put that away to be able to stay in the moment.
I love that. No, I love practical metaphors where you can actually, act out what you're doing. I was speaking to someone in a webinar a few months ago who was talking about they coached a girls' soccer team, and they said, my girls, they wear 4 hair ties on their wrist. And if the first quarter doesn't go well for them, they take the hair tie off and they throw it away. And it's like, it doesn't matter anymore. We've got these 3 left, and that's what's important to us. And I love, Jeff, what you said about the shelving, because you can actually physically do the hand movements of the shelf. I'm taking this out from me, didn't go right, and I'm going to put it on the shelf. We'll come back to it and work on it at practice. And what's left is, what's left in us. Thank you, Jeff. Anyone else got anything to contribute in terms of resilience phrases or ways we can, forget about moments, setbacks?
Simon Hall here. With the university competition, we compete as a team against the different universities, both men's and women's. And the students have a routine of doing this cheer before they actually compete. So we meet on the court with the other team. Introductions are made for each of the positions, and then they huddle and they have a chant that they've developed, and they say a few positive words to each other of encouragement, and then they do this chant and a cheer. And it's a really positive vibe at the beginning that they all feel as they go into their individual matches.
Thank you, Simon. So I think cheers and chants have so many different benefits in terms of sport. It gets you pumped up, especially if you're yelling loud. It kind of gets your adrenaline going. But also is that moment right before your race or your match or your game that you don't have time to think about what you're worried about. If you have any fears going into the match, if you have any worries, this chant that you're involved in with your teammates is like time to forget about that. I have this job to chant right now, and I'm going to go in and play straight afterwards. Thank you, Simon. I think that was Jamie. You also had something to say?
Oh, yeah, really quick one. I think all the coaches on here will agree squash is very individual, so you got to be careful of using the same phrases for every single player. But a really basic one that I like is just simply work hard, and that's really the only thing you can probably control. So we like to just say work hard when things are going bad.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And what you're saying about that individuality of each player, I think that's one of the huge benefits of individual sports is like you don't have to find a phrase that caters to your whole team. You just have to find something that works with that one player, and creating that relationship is really important as well, as we know from the research. So, just creating a word that really connects with them is another way to enhance that coach-athlete relationship. It's personable. Thank you. All right, so that's all I have. I'm going to share my screen one more time to share my contact information before we go. Oh, I did the ARC. So great resilience phrases, a great tangible takeaway to go and take into your coaching practice. I will also send out the positive reappraisal worksheet to try and change negative phrases into positive phrases. And then just my contact details here at the end. If you want to know anything more about the guidebook or the concept of emotional intelligence and the research behind it, I am welcome to answer any questions. I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I've sent the guidebook out to Jeff as well. So contact him or myself if you are interested in receiving it. It's free of charge. Does anyone have any questions regarding emotional intelligence in coaching or in athletics? In squash, in general? I am open to the floor.
Thanks, Esme, for that great presentation. I think we have time for a couple of questions. So if anyone has a question, feel free to type in the chat and or unmute your microphone and ask Esme. I think the thing that I take away from this presentation, Esme, is emotional intelligence and that word trigger. everything focuses around a trigger, for most athletes, and how it connects, whether it's performance or their emotions. There's always something that triggers that. And so I find those two words really go hand in hand and complement each other.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah. There's two ways to look at your emotions. If you go to a psychologist or if you do some extensive work on yourself, you can change the emotions that you feel. But I think in sport, when you feel so many emotions and your emotions are kind of all over the place, it's not so much about changing the emotions themselves, but actually managing them once they come up.
So one question here, do you have a favorite app for mindfulness practice?
That is a good question, and I can't remember what it's called. Calm, I think it's called. Yeah, so there is and I wouldn't say this is really targeted generally at mindfulness, but it does incorporate the concept of mindfulness. It's an app called Calm. It kind of runs you through meditation activities, mindfulness activities, stuff like that. And I actually have a friend that is an athletic sports psychologist at West Virginia University, and he uses this with all of his athletes and says definitely beneficial for them. So I would probably recommend that one.
Great. Thanks for that question. Any other last call for questions? And if you do have something after the fact, you can certainly reach out to Esme through her contact information, or you can email me and I can connect you with Esme as well.
I just want to come back to, I thought there were some really wonderful points under strategies, but we do have difficulty with some students who get into a head game with the referee because you're two people on court, you're one person, one referee, and they're judging you on every rally, what you could have done, might have done, should have done. And sometimes, especially juniors, really lose it. And
Right.
they have a terrible time settling down and regaining control. And it can get into a nasty situation very quickly. And I thought your strategies were excellent. I could see all of them applying. So thank you for that that section in particular. I don't know if you want to
Another
add to that.
one, sorry, Simon. Yeah, sorry, I have one more thing to add to the referee. There's actually a whole section in the guidebook about referee decisions. And I think another good strategy that I've used with teams that I've done mental training with is the controllables versus the uncontrollables. So what I do is I bring out an A4 sheet of paper, 8x11 or whatever a standard piece of paper is. They fold the paper in half, and on the left hand, they write everything in a game or a match that is controllable to them. How much they drink before, how much, they get sleep the night before, things like that, things that are really controllable. And then on the right-hand side of the paper, they write down things that aren't controllable to them. So referee decisions, how the other player plays, what the temperature is of the court that day, things that they can't control at all. And then we have them rip the paper in half right down the middle, scrunch up the uncontrollables and throw it away and say, this is what your focus should be on. Everything that you can control is what we are going to focus on for this match and every match coming. And we can change it if we need to change it, but these are what our focus is. And often it doesn't take away from the fact that they can get frustrated over the referee, but it does take the focus more on controllables, so they're worried a little bit more about it and kind of see the referee decisions a little bit less.
It's a great idea. I really like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so given the time, Esme, we're going to wrap this up. But again, on behalf of Squash Canada and everyone that attended today, thank you for this amazing presentation. For everybody on the call, I will send out all of the resources and materials in the video link that Esme mentioned today, and you'll get that later today or tomorrow. Going forward, just a friendly reminder, this was our last Coach PD webinar for 2020. Going into 2021, we'll be back with more webinars. January 6th, how to market yourself on social media, and it'll have a bit of a fitness and health twist to it. And that's by Hannah Blatt, one of our top squash players. End of January, we have urban squash programming on January 27th. And then coaching beyond the game will be in February. And then after that, we'll have a full slate of additional presentations on school squash and some squash technical pieces. So we encourage you to register for those. And with that being said, we hope you have a happy holidays and thank you for attending today's presentation.